Good to see you again. Welcome. I'm Felicity Ezewike. Africa's second ever directly elected female president and Namibia's first female head of state, Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah, was recently sworn in to lead a country facing high rates of unemployment, inequality, and poverty. While the task ahead is daunting, her emergence marks a significant step towards inclusive leadership in Africa. Reacting to her election, Africa's first democratically elected female president, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, says it offers a renewed sense of pride and possibility for Africa. For her, electing women is not about tokenism. It is about unlocking potential and driving meaningful change. So for the first half of today's conversation on One Slot, we'll be exploring this milestone and all its possibilities for women in leadership across Africa. And I have guests to help us make sense of all of this and see where we're going to. In the academia, we have a lecturer from the University of Namibia, that's Dr. Gurvy Kavei. We also have Paul Nantulya, senior researcher, U.S. National Defense University. Dr. Henning Melber, he's a professor, Nordic Africa Institute in Sweden. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Dr. Kavei, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Felicity, and good afternoon to you and the viewers. Thanks for having me.
We're glad to have you, Dr. Kavei. Let's start with you and just get your reaction. I'm not going to be asking the mundane. I'm going to come from because Ellen Johnson has written quite extensively on Nandi-Ndaitwah's election. She says it presents a significant shift on the continent, signaling that African citizens are ready to embrace women as leaders. In your view, how does her emergence reflect the changing attitudes towards women in leadership position, and what progress still needs to be made?
It's definitely a true statement when it comes to Namibia, which has established an impressive track record when it comes to female politicians holding high and now the highest office in government and the state. SWAPO, as the former liberation movement, adopted 10 years ago a zebra resolution, meaning that for the National Assembly elections, every second post on the list needs to be a woman. That already made Namibia the second most gender equal country on the continent and one of the top 5 or 6 in the world. And since in Namibia elections take place in parallel between the National Assembly and the presidential candidates nominated by party, it's also notable that Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah scored more votes than SWAPO, meaning she has a very high approval rate among the Namibian electorate. And Namibians celebrate her election as a sign that Namibia is very advanced when it comes to gender equality. And notably, Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah now appointed another woman as vice president and another woman as Speaker of the National Assembly, meaning that the 3 top positions in Namibian government are held by women.
Dr. Melba, that was a very good opening, and you actually touched on the second question I wanted to ask as to, the environment that has allowed the first female president of Namibia to emerge. We'll explore that in the course of this conversation, hopefully, if we have time. But there is another angle I wanted to bring to the fore. I will take that. I don't know if we have Okay, we only have Dr. Melba for now, so we'll just continue with you, sir. On the flip side of the argument of, having the right policies, quota for women in politics, the SWAPO, the party's dominance, analysts are arguing, meant that there was little surprise that she won the elections in November of 2024 by 58%. Do you align more to this position? I doubt that based on the quota you just mentioned, or you align more to the argument by Sirleaf that Africa is ready to embrace more women leadership. But, the floor is yours now.
Again, Felicity, to be a bit more nuanced, I'm not sure if the general statement is justified that Africa, as a general reference point, is ready to vote women into power. Looking at some of the continent's countries, I'm a bit reluctant to endorse such a generalization. But as I started, Namibia definitely has shown that it's ready. And Namibians are proud that they are among the vanguard of countries on the continent when it comes to female representation in politics. And just to make it very clear, I don't think that Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah was only elected because she is a woman. She is elected because what she stands for as a seasoned politician who is a second-generation struggle veteran, who has been in the government since independence. She was the foreign minister of Namibia for 2 terms in office. So she has a high caliber career, and she was elected for the merits she accumulated.
All right, since I'm still with you, and I think we're going to have a little more time, I'm going to ask you to expand a little on your submission about the environment that has allowed Ndaitwah to excel as a president and as a woman. Talk to us about some of these policies that, let's just put it under the quotes, the Namibia example.
I think one needs to understand a specific colonial trajectory in Namibia, which to some extent applies also to Botswana and South Africa, which put women in a very central place. And generally, I think African women always show perseverance and strength, and they are the movers and shakers, not always recognized for that. But in Southern Africa, contract labor history played a special role. And you have in Namibia and in Botswana, as a result, until the very day, proportionally the highest number of female-headed households on the continent, if not in the world. That means women have always played a very strong role, taking care of families, raising the children, and you might say that's also the case in other African countries, but they also had a high degree of influence when it came to socio-economic aspects of reproducing a meaningful income. So women in Namibia have a long history, and there were some indigenous communities who also already in pre-colonial times and ever since then held chieftainships as women. Women in Namibia are to a large extent respected and recognized, notwithstanding the fact that gendered violence is also very high in Namibia, which to some extent I believe is explained due to the socio-economic situation where many men are suffering from unemployment, feeling not having the means to lead a dignified life, and they act out their frustration, not in politics, but to some extent in female gendered violence. So to avoid the impression that it's honeymoon and roses when it comes to Namibia, you have to put it into a perspective which explains why women are able to make such an impressive political career, notwithstanding the fact that in the daily interactions they are often still the targets of rape, gendered violence, and other forms of discrimination.
Yeah. That is a global phenomenon, actually. I just want to go back a bit, not to put you on the spot, but if you can, I'd love for you to talk to us about this quota system that's operated in their parliament. Some have attributed, again, to, this emergence of women leadership in Namibia. Can you talk to us about how that works, if you can, sir?
Yes, sure. It was brought about by Namibia's second president in office, Hifikepunye Pohamba. But as far as we know, with the backing of Namibia's first president, the legendary and iconic Tatekulu Sam Nujoma, they felt that it's not good enough to talk about gender equality in politics, but to take the initiatives also in formal terms to ensure gender equality when it comes to the female representation in politics. And that was adopted by the SWAPO Congress in 2014 with the so-called CIPRA resolution, meaning, as I said, that every second place on the list for the National Assembly elections has to be a woman. And the same applies within SWAPO, where there are 4 top offices: the SWAPO president, the vice president, the secretary general, and the deputy secretary general. And since then, 2 of those positions were held by women. And to the extent that at the last elections, there was a problem to find a second man next to the 2 women and 1 man elected. So they didn't fill the 4s because it would have been another woman, which sounds a bit funny, if not absurd, but it reflects the situation where the party structures and the implementation of the CIPRA resolution means that women play a significant role in politics.
I mean, Doc, everything you have just echoed is something that is something that has been echoed as to how we can move the needle in more inclusivity when it comes to politics, leadership, and governance. You have highlighted deliberate actions towards that. Before we continue talking about, women in leadership and the atmosphere that we currently have, I want to flip back to something I mentioned in the introduction and you alluded to in your submission. The task ahead is daunting: unemployment, poverty, and inequality in the land. You said she was not elected solely because she is a woman. She has these capabilities. What is your level of optimism that she will live up to par when it comes to addressing some of these issues during her time?
Felicity, my level of optimism is somewhat measured and low because the challenges are really daunting. The labor survey of 2023 established that, applying an open definition of unemployment, that 57% of Namibians in working age are unemployed. We only have a country of 3 million inhabitants, but the number of persons in formal employment are 350,000. And of those, more than half have an income in monetary terms which is just above the poverty level. This is the challenge. Namibia is a rich country with poor people. And Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah, like most others who were competing for presidency, put an emphasis on employment creation. But like so many other things in politics, that's easy said and much more difficult to be done. It's too early to judge. I believe she is sincere and serious. She is sincere and serious also about fighting corruption. In one of her most recent speeches, already as elected president, Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah said for her corruption has to be treated like treason. That's a very remarkable statement. And she reiterated that stance in her opening of the first cabinet session today, where she again stressed the need to fight corruption, to create employment. And what still comes into the picture is the colonial structure still alive. In Namibia, colonialism is not past. Namibia is a country which illustrates colonialism in the present. Close to half of the country's territory is private-owned commercial farmland. And of that half, more than 70% is owned by white commercial farmers. That is still the land grabbing of colonialism. There was a genocide taking place in Namibia, the first genocide in the 20th century, when German colonialism decimated the Ovaherero and the Nama and the Damara. They have not recovered demographically from what happened then. They have not been able to return to their land because it's in predominantly white ownership. So these are tremendous tasks for Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah and her team. What she started, I should add, is to practice fiscal discipline. She reduced the number of ministries from 21 to 14, and she filled only 7 of the 14 ministries with deputy ministers to avoid favoritism, to avoid excessive spending of money for offices where you could be more efficient if you reduce. So she also strongly feels less is more.
Less is more indeed if we are to go anywhere. Dr. Melba, I want us to look at, you even hinted at it, that yes, it's great that she has won, but it doesn't take away some of the challenges that remain for women. And the woman that first got the position of President Sirleaf also cautioned that we should not ignore the persistent challenges that women face. But there's something else you said that I would want you to speak on, and that is, she's saying that entering politics is still seen as a privilege rather than a right for women. She says, she thought that, what's your view? That's hers, rather. What's your view?
I think we should leave behind the times where male chauvinism kind of generously poses benevolently by saying, let's give them a try and let some women try to show if they are as good as we are. They are never thinking that they might even be better than men. And the new government in Namibia, elected by the majority of Namibians, has the chance and opportunity to show that a team which is more composed of women than of men is able to pull it off. That women are as qualified in politics, and that it's not a gift to women to allow them a little bit of space to occupy niches, to say, okay, it basically adds to our image being to some extent proportional when it comes to gender representation. I think that is something against which also this government will be measured. Is this government indeed able to show that women are at least as good as men, if not better. And that's a historic opportunity. And there, of course, you could even say it's an opportunity not only for Namibia, it's an opportunity for other countries on the African continent to convince others by what you do that you deserve to be voted in power. Not because of the gender, but because of your competences.
Okay, let's look generally. What are the most significant barriers women face when pursuing leadership positions in Africa?
Sorry, I didn't get you on that.
I'm asking you, speaking generally now, what are the most significant barriers women face when pursuing leadership positions across Africa?
I think we still face some degree of male chauvinism in most of the countries. It actually also includes Namibia. They are still fighting an uphill battle. As you mentioned, she only is the second democratically elected female head of state on the whole continent. I think men still tend to look down. They consider it as a patronizing uplifting of women to provide them some opportunities. It's changing. And it should change not only in politics, it needs to change also when it comes to parenting, which comes to my mind. That fathers are willing to accept the same responsibilities in taking care of children is a major step. That men try to understand that what they might consider as a weakness of women, emotionally, being gentle, being caring, is actually a strength and can also be a strength in politics. And I see signs that there are the changes in mindsets which lead to that way, but it still is quite a way to be covered.
All right, Dr. Melba, I understand we have Dr. Kavei with us now. Can you confirm you can hear me, sir?
I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can. Glad to finally have you. I know the network has been hazy for a bit. Talk to us about, I don't know how much you followed Dr. Melba's submission, but let's hear your views as to what the impact of her emergence, Nandi-Ndaitwah's emergence as president, means for women in leadership in Africa.
Well, I must say I'm very sorry that I really didn't follow most of the discussions because completely I couldn't get the sound coming through to me. But nonetheless, I think it's quite a milestone indeed in terms of having a woman in leadership position in Namibia. It's quite a great personal achievement at Her Excellency's personal as a person. But also, I think a great achievement for the party, SWAPO. As Melba pointed out at the beginning, this has been long coming for the past 10 years when the party introduced the zebra style of, electorates in all platforms and positions of political leadership in the country. It's also a great achievement for the country, but I think for the continent, it sends a very strong message out there. Look, I mean, we are most of the time regard ourselves as the youngest democracy in Africa. And here we are, 35 years old, we are having a female president. When you have big economies, highly democratic countries like the US that are still grappling to get a female president in that position. So that really for me sends a very strong signal that it is not about how long you've been in place, but it's also not about being a woman per se that you are taking that position, but I think it comes as a result of personal qualities and content and character of the person that you are looking at. So she comes there on her own personal merit, and her leadership role in various positions of leadership have been time tested through the liberation struggle, where she had quite a number of positions she held, as well as since independence to this point in time. She has had a number of ministries that she's been running And that speaks volume in terms of drilling the confidence in the public electorates in the country to look at her as somebody that can steer the ship forward, you know.
Talk to us quickly about, there's something that Sirleaf said. I've asked Melba, but I want you to speak on, she said, even today, it still seems women entering politics seems like a privilege rather than a right that it should be. Is this a view that you share? And what about this Namibia's example encourages hope that things are indeed changing?
I would partly maybe share that on perhaps the notion that you know, society is really patriarchal in a way, very highly patriarchal. And at domestic level, you get a lot of, you know, domestic violence. And most of these domestic violence incidents that we experience are based on male chauvinism mentality and, you know, looking down on women as subjects. And that really translates all the way into high echelons of powers at the country level. And I would believe that phenomena spells disaster in terms of people and public having a positive attitude towards and accommodating women in positions of power. More especially when you are talking of young women who are in most cases actually perceived as not having the requisite experience to take any office position. And but when it comes to somebody that has really stood the ground in terms of being time-tested, like Netumbo, coming with age, I maybe saw less of that negative attitude towards them. But yes, I think we have a long way to go in terms of overcoming that. But I think the other thing also one can point out is the fact that Namibia, it's a highly exposed country, being a small population. You tend to interact with all forms of thought processes that are prevailing globally and internationally that are trendy. And therefore, we are very fast to adopt some of the best practices when it comes to gender equality, when it comes to diversity. And I think that's an advantage in our case, which may not be the case maybe in largely populated countries, maybe in Africa. But I think for a small population like ours, it's easy to adopt and hit the ground running.
We're actually out of time for this part of the conversation, but I want to squeeze in one more question for you. And if you can answer it in 40 seconds, I know it's a squeeze, but just try. What are some of the most pressing issues that African leaders, women leaders, should look to addressing in the next decade to give room for more women in leadership positions?
My take is that I would love to see as many women leaders as possible, because there is a joke going on in Namibia currently that we now have the mother in the house, and therefore the basic households will be taken care of. So the men would relax a little bit and be fed, and making sure that the kitchen is, you know, the boss is taking care of that. The dressing is being taken care of. And when it comes to managing public institutions, I think women would, for me, really do a better job in the sense that they are more to be trusted than men, especially when it comes to fighting issues of corruption and nepotism, to which they are less susceptible than their male counterparts. So I think, you know, it will do a great deal in terms of dealing with it. But the greatest challenges we are faced currently now is that of poverty, is that of equity, distribution of resources, as well as employment. And maybe when she focuses and women start focusing on reformation of policies to create job opportunities through manufacturing and value addition of the natural resources that we tend to export as they are, I think that would turn the wheel a different way and different direction.
All right, Dr. Merva, in 30 seconds, please, your final thoughts on the subject.
It's great that the election of Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah also paves the way for such conversations in Nigeria. And just the interaction we had now, and I noted with delight that you were talking to two men who basically are in full support of what we are currently witnessing in Namibia and hope to be able to witness in many other African countries very soon.
Thank you, gentlemen, for giving us your time. We appreciate the insights you've provided.
You're most welcome indeed. Thank you very much.